Hey everyone, my name is Ned, and today I'd like to take you on a journey inside the destroyed and corrupted subterranean ARK, also known as Aberration. In this video, I'll be going over everything you'll want to know so that you can best survive in one of the most unpredictable and intense maps in the game. What sets Aberration apart from the rest is that it's entirely underground, shielded from the dangerous radiation overhead. Unlike any of the other ARKs, the Aberration was partly destroyed by the survivors that came before, resulting in the artificial ozone layer being abruptly depleted, which caused the surface to be burned to the point of being completely uninhabitable. Additionally, Aberration has immense relevance in the overall story of ARK, being the station that creates one of the most dangerous beings the survivors ever face. With lore explanations aside, Aberration is a deep, fantastical map with rich and unique biomes, new resources to collect, subterrestrial creatures to find, and exciting new tools which take full advantage of the exclusive verticality in enemies. Now, without further delay, let's talk about the map's biomes. Aberration contains 4 biomes in total, being the map with probably the least amount, but it makes up for it with each one being genuinely unique and having very clear differences. Something to keep in mind while exploring is that generally the deeper you venture down, the more dangerous things will get, with the most deadly parts of the map being at the bottom. With that being said, first up we have what is referred to as the Fertile Region. This biome is considered the safest of the 4, and it's also the place that contains all the spawn regions. You'll find tall redwood and mushroom forests, a vast lake with all kinds of aquatic creatures, and the remnants of an ancient device which extends through the Fertile Region, down past the Bioluminescent, and deep into the Molten Element region. It's a pretty big landmark, and even one of the spawn zones has survivors waking up inside of the enormous portal room itself. When it comes to difficulty, the Fertile Grounds are still fairly dangerous, despite being beginner zones. Survivors will have to evade or fight all number of aggressive creatures, both old and new. The most common kinds of enemies you may encounter in this biome include aberrant raptors, spinos, sarcos, ravagers, and carcinos. If you can put up with them or stay out of their reach by settling in higher areas, the Fertile Grounds can be a fantastic place to live, even in the endgame. Next, we have the Bioluminescent region. This biome is usually the next place survivors venture into from the Fertile region because there are multiple slopes and natural ziplines that connect them. In this biome, you'll be introduced to some of the most invasive and troublesome creatures, primarily being but not limited to the Nameless. These horrifying things will be covered later in the video. Aside from extra dangerous land-dwelling creatures like Arthropleura, Megalosaurus, and Titanoboa, you'll also find large lakes that span across the region. These lakes carry some of the most frightening creatures typically found in the oceans of other maps, which include eels, Cnidaria, and baryonyx. If survivors can endure against all odds, the bioluminescent biome can be the most profitable area for metal, and not just in Aberration, but in any given ARK map ever. There are truly insane amounts of metal rocks here, which can be one of the most compelling reasons survivors are drawn in. Now, some may choose to go even deeper than the bioluminescent region for many reasons, such as resources and creatures, but those that dare to do so need to have the proper equipment. Unlike any other area in the map, the Molten Element region has lethal radiation in nearly the entire biome, and will kill survivors within a few seconds if they're not wearing hazard suit armor. For those that can get past this barrier, they'll quickly find that there are much worse things to worry about than just the radiation. The Molten Element biome features some of the most dangerous enemies in the entire map, where you'll commonly find Purlovia, basilisks, rock drakes, and the petrifying Reaper Queens. What's worse is that if any of these things manage to tear off even a single piece of your armor, you'll quickly succumb to radiation poisoning unless you can patch it up and put on a new piece. Appearance-wise, the Molten Element region can be broken down into 2 general areas. These would include the paths that surround the element rivers and waterfalls, and then the deep, abyssal Grave of the Lost, home of the rock drakes, which requires traveling hundreds of meters down into the deepest part of the map to reach. The main reason that survivors would attempt descending is for the extraction of rock drake eggs. Overall, the Molten Element region is probably the harshest environment in the game, and for really good reason. It is only recommended for survivors to go here if excellently equipped and prepared for just about any circumstances. The last biome we'll be going over is known as the Surface. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the Surface is, well, the outside portion of Aberration. Just like any other map, Aberration has a day-night cycle, albeit a bit strange, and it fully dictates what the surface will be like. During the day, the ground is completely aflame, and anything that walks on the surface will be charred within 2 to 3 seconds. This includes survivors, creatures, and even structures. It's for this reason that anything you build on the surface will not survive a full day-night cycle. The only time survivors are able to explore the surface is when the sun is completely out of view during the night. Because of Aberration's strange day-night cycle, this nighttime period can have variable lengths. This also will be covered later in the video. The other way the surface massively stands out from other biomes is that it's the only place where you can find obelisks. They're dysfunctional in appearance, but work just like you'd expect them to. Now, aesthetics and quirks aside, the surface has a decent amount of resources, being a great place to collect oil and the newer resource element ore. For creatures, it strictly has the things that can burrow into the ground or are able to find places to hide from the heat. These include surface Reaper Kings, Nameless, and Seekers. Lastly, this biome is the only place where you can find supply crates, not to be confused with loot crates. In these supply crates you can find all kinds of new gear, of course including items from Aberration itself. With the main 4 biomes out of the way, I'd like to go over some of the events that exist inside of these biomes. Aberration only has one weather event, if you could call it that, and it can be a hassle, but it's nothing too disruptive. The earthquake shakes the entire ARK, regardless of where you are, and the impact is usually felt larger the deeper you go. All it does is kick up a couple different kinds of resources out of the surrounding terrain, allowing you to pick them up, as well as shaking any survivors in small to high amounts, again depending on the depth. This is made worse if you're in water, where it can violently throw you and can be pretty frustrating at times. The bigger thing that it does is prevents you from using climb picks while the screen is shaking. You'll be fine as long as you hold on to where you are, but the moment you try to climb up, you'll lose your grip and fall. To prevent falling, you'll want to only climb up in between the times that it shakes, almost like a kind of mini game. While the earthquakes happen in regular amounts throughout and really only last a minute or two at a time, the unique seasons and day-night cycles are an always ongoing thing. Basically how it works is there are 3 seasons that make up a year in the map. 1 year is 10 days, and the 3 seasons dictate how fast the time changes depending on whether it's daytime or nighttime. That might sound a little confusing, so I'll try and break it down like this. Let's say it's day 10 in-game. For day 10 through 14, it's going to be 50% day and 50% night. This is the normal time when the speed at which it progresses isn't dependent on the time of day itself. By day 14, it'll go 90% day and 10% night, meaning that the day takes up 90% of the entire time spent through the cycle, and the night accounts for 10% of it, making daytime last a long time and nighttime lasting a very short time. After day 17, it reverses, going to 10% day and 90% night. Once it reaches day 20, the next interval of 10, it resets, going back to normal 50-50. This repeats forever, rotating through each of the 3 seasons every 3 to 4 days. Hopefully I did an okay job at explaining that. The relevance of this is mostly related to going out on the surface, as you usually only want to go out during either 50-50 or 10-90, when nighttime lasts a long time, just so you have extra time to get back underground in case you get lost. With the seasons covered, I'll be briefly talking about hazardous spores and going a little bit more into radiation poisoning. The hazardous spores can be found in 3 types, and you can inhale them either through walking over the dangerous mushrooms which emit them, or by passing into the air where the spores exist. In the fertile region, you'll face what are known as dizzy spores. There are only a couple areas where you'll actually encounter the permanent airborne spores, but you can find the mushrooms which emit them all over the place. These are red and look pretty evil, so make sure you don't go near them. You're able to remedy this by consuming tons of agaravic mushrooms before or after infliction, with consumption beforehand allowing for temporary immunity. In the bioluminescent region, you'll find blue jellyfish-looking mushrooms which emit the freezing spores, with lots of areas that have the spores just floating presently. Freezing spores are usually a lot worse, oftentimes killing survivors soon after infliction. The remedy mushroom for freezing spores is the aquatic type. Lastly, the uncommon molten element zone mushrooms can give you the deadliest spore effect, but luckily you're probably never going to actually encounter it because the areas they exist in are usually irradiated. I should have mentioned earlier, but hazard suits fully protect survivors from being inflicted with any of these spores, which is why wearing the suit around the map where you go can really save you the trouble. Despite how unlikely infliction is, the branched element mushroom spores can be slightly remedied with acerbic mushrooms. Now, radiation poisoning is only found in the molten element region, and it exists in pretty much the entire area save for a handful of very specific little kind of safety pockets. This radiation poisoning will kill you really quickly without hazard suit armor, and more importantly, when it comes to tames, you'll want to make mushroom broths for them if they don't have a natural resistance to it. I'll have a radiation wiki page linked below, which should help to kind of learn more about which creatures are and aren't resistant to radiation. With that said, let's discuss the many types of resources you can find within Aberration, both old and new. First up is crystal. Now, funnily enough, this resource is actually a little tedious to get, despite how you'd expect there to be tons of bioluminescent crystals all over the place. Occasionally you can find crystal in its standard form, but usually it's collected as more of a byproduct of mining gems. Metal, on the other hand, is common all over the map in primarily the bioluminescent, molten element, and surface zones. Like I said before, Aberration is a remarkable map for metal collection and allows for hundreds of thousands to be collected in a very short time, especially in the bioluminescent. Obsidian is up next, and it's really only found in the same biomes as metal, completely excluding the fertile region. Silica pearls are common in the fertile lakes and in some of the bioluminescent ones as well. Oil rocks can be found mostly on the surface, but also deep in the molten element region by the rock drake trenches. Amazingly, black pearls actually get their own spot on the resource map, which means they can be directly collected by hand, albeit in one of the most dangerous places. These pearls can be found in great abundance in the rock drake trench area and make Aberration probably the most profitable map for black pearls in the entire game. Like black pearls, polymer also gets its own spot on the resource map, except being found in the organic variant. It can be collected from these strange looking plants all across the entire molten element region in pretty high amounts. Another way you can get organic polymer is from harvesting dead carcinos. Next up, we've got the element ore. This raw resource can be found in large amounts all over the surface and occasionally in the molten element areas. The second to last resource I'd like to briefly talk about is the congealed gas balls. These can be collected with the use of gas collectors, which are kind of mini structures that have to be placed on the gas veins, a lot like the oil and water veins from Scorched Earth, and will passively collect gas balls over time. Last on our list are the gems. Aberration adds 3, being the green, blue, and red. The green gems can be found in both the fertile region and bioluminescent, and the blue are exclusive to the bioluminescent, with red gems being exclusive to the molten element region. You'll probably be seeing the pattern here. These biomes are commonly referred to as the green, blue, and red biomes because of these trademark gem resources which spawn in them. In turn, from here on, I'll be referring to the fertile as the green zone, bioluminescent as the blue zone, and molten element as the red zone. At this point, without further delay, let's talk about the map's unique new creatures. It's important to clarify that Aberration, similar to the other post-island story maps, contains lots of the older creatures that you would typically find on the island, except here you'll only find them as aberrant variants. This means that anything from Meganeura to Stegosaurus has an aberrant type. These aberrant creatures actually evolved to have glow-in-the-dark skin, and compared to their normal counterparts, they have 4% less health and deal 6% more damage. In addition to this, as mentioned previously, some of them are even immune to the red zone's radiation. Another thing is that Aberration has no rideable flyers whatsoever, and none of the flyers from other maps can be transferred onto it, which kind of forces survivors to take advantage of the map's natural inhabitants. With that information aside, the first creatures I'd like to talk about are the light pets. There are 4 in total, and they include the bulb dogs, featherlights, shine horns, and the glowtails. These light pets, although cute and cuddly, serve as integral creatures to your survival in the more dangerous areas. Not only do they light up the surroundings, but they are also able to keep Nameless off your tail at the cost of attracting seekers. This dynamic is really fun to have and makes it more challenging to survive in these areas because of this micromanaging of light on versus light off. Bulb dogs can be found all over the green zone, featherlights are common in the red zone as well as glowtails, and the shine horns are usually found in the blue zone. Next are the glowbugs, lampreys, nameless, and seekers. None of these creatures are tameable, and they're each drastically different in their own ways. Glowbugs are harmless little guys which exist all over the map and have a charge mechanic which can be extracted from, very similar to how the jugbugs work on Scorched Earth. Lampreys, on the other hand, are basically Aberration's version of a leech, but are far more aquatic. If they latch onto a survivor, they'll give them a charged light buff, which can be beneficial but also drains the survivor's health for the duration they're latched on. It can be removed just like a normal leech with the use of fire. Next are the Nameless. These have been referred to throughout the video, but now I'll actually explain what they are. Nameless are highly aggressive creatures which only spawn in blue and red zones and have extremely strong skin but are weak to charge light where it burns their flesh and makes them open to attacks. When there's one, there's usually more to come, and if there are just a couple, one of them will grow into an alpha pack leader. If given enough time with 10 of them left alive, they can eventually cause a subterranean Reaper King to be summoned, which is definitely not what you want. They are particularly attracted to survivors that don't have light either from a light pet or otherwise, and for this reason it's best to only travel into the blue and red zones once survivors have tamed a light pet. The last creature in this category would be the Seeker. These things are found all over the red zone and the surface, and can also be found in some artifact caves. Seekers are vicious, flying squid bat monsters, which, very similar to the Nameless, can be extremely strong one moment and extremely weak the next. They're basically the inverse of Nameless, being highly attracted and empowered to charge light rather than being afraid of it. The light makes them much stronger, giving them extra protective skin. If survivors have a light pet on, Seekers will quickly swarm them and try as hard as they can to devour the source. They can also be really hard to kill just because of their janky, quick movements, and to quote Helena Walker, "I really bloody hate these things." Next on our list are the Ravagers. These are wolf-like creatures, which survivors will quickly come to be afraid of. They're commonly found in the green and blue zones, and are usually the main cause of death early on. They travel in packs of 3, are fast, agile, and even have a bleed-bite attack, not unlike the Allosaurus, which can drain lots of health over time. Their agility allows even wild Ravagers to climb up and down natural and survivor-made ziplines if needed to reach their prey, making them one of the smarter creatures in the game, at least AI-wise. Equally as terrifying, but perhaps for different reasons, the Carcinos are giant crab creatures which exist in and around the rivers and lakes of the green and blue zones. They have the unique ability to pick up survivors and even tames 2 at a time, 1 in each claw, and can even toss them great distances if domesticated. It's because of this ability that they're great for farming resources, similar to the way that Argentavis would be used on other maps. They're also able to jump really high, making them pretty good at exploration and fleeing if need be. Lastly, Carcinos have an alpha variant, which can be twice as deadly whether on or off a mount, since sometimes they can even grab survivors off their tames. Next, we have the Roll Rat. These things are actually a good way of getting gems early game because of their ability to burrow into the ground, at least in the wild. When they burrow, they usually end up tossing some gems out of the ground, which can be picked up, but just be careful when stealing them because the Roll Rats are usually very protective over their precious resources. When they're tamed, they can be used to collect large amounts of wood and have a very unique roll cage saddle, which allows them to basically smash into things, destroying all manner of rocks, trees, or animals that might get in the way. Nearing the end of the creatures section, let's talk about the basilisks. These are more or less giant snakes and have the ability to burrow underground, surprising their prey with an ambush attack. They also have a ranged attack where they spit toxic green venom, very similar to the poison wyvern. Basilisks can spawn all over the green, blue, and red zones, and strangely enough, they even spawn in the beginner areas, which only adds to the difficulty of starting out. Like the Carcinos, basilisks also have an alpha variant, which I can say from personal experience is one of the rarest creatures in the entire game. Second to last, we have the Rock Drake. This is pretty much the trademark aberration creature and is highly praised for its amazing agility and gliding abilities. Rock Drakes can climb on any surface and are able to camouflage themselves at the expense of stamina. Combined with the gliding and leap soar attack, they are the best way to traverse the aberration, without considering creatures from other maps. Rock Drakes are found primarily in the trenches where their nests and eggs can be found, but also exist in the red and blue zones and sometimes the borders of the green zone. The last creatures I'll be talking about are the Reapers. There are a couple types, but the main ones are the Reaper Queen, King, and the Alpha Surface Reaper. There are also Subterranean, Normal Surface, and Elemental Reapers. All Reapers, aside from the Subterranean, can only be found in the red zone and on the surface. The Queens are the only variant which can be used to allow for survivors to have their own tamed Reapers. This involves trapping the Queen, weakening her, and letting her impale you, injecting you with a little baby Reaper. It's a pretty crude process and is one of the more unique ways of taming found in the game. Both Reaper Kings and Queens can bite, do a tailspin attack which has very high knockback, and can jump great distances when tamed. They also have a ranged attack where they shoot acid balls from their tails, which can significantly slow down survivors if hit by it. Similar to the Nameless, all Reapers are very weak to charge light, burning their flesh away and making it much easier to deal damage to them. With creatures out of the way, let's talk about supply drops and loot crates. Supply drops can be found only on the surface biome, and tend to have worse stuff than the Scorched Earth ones, but better than the island ones, at least from my experience. Loot crates, on the other hand, can be pretty good, especially the dungeon ones found in the more dangerous artifact caves. Unlike the island or Scorched, Aberration doesn't have any deep sea crates, likely because of the fact that there is no clear border surrounding the map. When it comes to weapons, Aberration is a lot lighter than Scorched, adding only the Charge Lantern, which is basically a discount light pet, and the Tech Railgun, which is really only something much later in the game. In spite of the low number of weapons, Aberration actually adds a ton of new tools, which include the zipline anchors, allowing for the creation of ziplines, as well as the glow sticks, climb picks, pliers, and charge batteries. In the armor department, there is of course the full hazard suit, which protects survivors from spores and radiation, along with the attachable glider suit and zipline motor, allowing for further traversal options throughout the map. Although Aberration doesn't add any new tile sets, it does feature a couple new structures such as the manual elevators, portable rope ladders, stone and metal cliff platforms, rugs, fish baskets, gas collectors, and tech sleeping pods. In an effort to save time, I won't be going in depth on any of these, but I'll leave a full link to the general Aberration wiki in the description if you'd like to learn more. Something you'll commonly find around Aberration are brightly lit up terminal looking things known as charge stations. I didn't exactly know where to include this in the video, but I didn't want to leave it out. Charge stations can be found all over the map and are the only way of getting element. Within their inventories, you can actually craft the element yourself, which requires varying amounts of gems, charge batteries, congealed gas balls, and element ore. Additionally, you can find hypercharge stations out in the surface area, which recharge slightly faster, but their dangerous spots usually aren't enough to make up for it. Following the story map formula, Aberration of course also has explorer notes. Whereas most other maps have 4 main authors, Aberration actually has a whopping 10. These authors include Helena, Rockwell, Mei Yin, Boris, Emilia, Imamu, Rusty, Sky, Trent, and Diana. Like the previous 2 maps, Aberration of course has the 4X and HLNA notes as well. The general story follows Helena, Rockwell, and Mei Yin meeting up at last and being introduced to new, later important characters like Diana. Rockwell has a massive transformation over the course of his Aberration notes, eventually becoming the overseer of the ARK itself, as the others make their escape to their final destination. One of the last things I'd like to cover is Aberration's artifact caves. Like Scorched Earth, there are a total of 3, one in each of the green, blue, and red zones. These caves are filled with super tough creatures, and are about what you should come to expect with pretty much all of ARK's caves. The Hidden Grotto is actually my favorite cave in any ARK map, just because of how challenging it is with the underwater sections. Aside from the tough creatures, loot drops, and hazards, they are of course home to each of the 3 artifacts. The Artifact of the Depths is found in the old railway cave, the Artifact of the Shadows can be located in the Hidden Grotto, and the Artifact of the Stalker rests deep within the Elemental Vault. The last thing on our list is Aberration's final and only boss, as well as overseer, Sir Edmund Rockwell. After learning about the power of element all the way back on Scorched Earth, Rockwell went mad and started further experimentation upon arriving to Aberration. Eventually, by the end, he turned himself into a beast and fell into the deep depths of the ARK, becoming the overseer of the station itself. He stands as the only thing in your way in order to ascend, and is a tough boss to beat. The fight has a few dynamics, but generally the most dangerous things are his tentacles, energy balls, and the army of Reapers and Nameless that he summons later on. The common strategy is to use an army of aberrant Stegosaurus or Megalosaurus, but you'll definitely want to research it before going in. Another way is to just ride on a rock drake and shoot off the back, destroying the tentacles and orbs, but it usually requires a lot more players. Whichever way it's done, after painfully defeating Rockwell, he falls back into the pool of element, and the ARK begins Ascension for all that remain alive. Much like the island's Ascension, you'll receive an extra 5, 10, or 15 levels for the Gamma, Beta, and Alpha difficulties respectively. So yeah, that is the entire video. My voice is probably getting a little hoarse at this point, but thank you so much if you stuck around for the whole thing. It took a lot of work in a very short time to make this, and I hope that you learned at least a couple of things that you maybe didn't know before. If you liked the video and want to support me, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel. Additionally, I have a Patreon which is associated with my ARK server, and it's also the single best way to support the creation of future videos like this one. As always, stay tuned for my next evolution guide, where I'll be covering the survivor's treacherous destination on Earth, more commonly known as Extinction. Once again, thank you for watching. Keep well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye everyone.